Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Andrea, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience living with the Trappists and Trappistines in my 20s. I'll go over my experience with the daily life and then stick around afterwards when I talk a little bit about my experience with that life and how it transformed my current life today. I lived with the Trappists in Virginia and in Iowa on and off in my 20s. For those who don't know, the Trappists are a reformed order of the Benedictine monastic tradition. And the monastic tradition in the Catholic faith began in the deserts of Egypt right after the death of Christ. And then through the 6th century, as monks and hermits from the desert started to congregate and live in community, Saint Benedict in the 6th century decided to reform and build these more formal structures of monasteries where people could live and pray together and grow in formation together as followers of Christ. The Cistercian tradition, which is also known as the Trappist tradition, came out of the Benedictine tradition in around the 11th century or so AD. And then throughout the years, the Cistercians started to reform themselves. The name Trappist actually comes from La Grande Trappe, which was a Cistercian monastery in France. So that's how the Trappists got their name. And they are today considered one of the most strict and cloistered communities and orders in the Catholic Church. The vows that they often take are vows like simplicity of inner and outer being, which basically means that you don't acquire clothes, you don't acquire possessions. All of your possessions basically are given up to the monastic community, and inner simplicity of thought, of speech, and of emotion. So there's a big focus on silence and contemplation as a continual part of life. Similar to that simplicity comes the vow of conversion of life. As a monk or nun, you're living in this cloistered monastery, which is typically one building with a library, with cells or rooms throughout the building, a chapel, a dining area called a refectory. And in this community, this physical space, you're also committing yourself to self-reflection constantly and constantly trying to convert yourself to what Christ wants us to become. So the Trappists aspire to become saints, even though they may not ultimately become a saint canonized in the Catholic Church. Another vow that they take is a vow of stability. Unlike other religious orders, the Trappists don't leave the monastery. They stay in the enclosure only for certain special events, like the death of a family member, or if they're going to Rome, for example, for a meeting among the order, do they actually leave their own monastic enclosure. So it is expected that you will basically live in the monastery, that you take vows in, and then die there. And that's why you'll see cemeteries literally right next to the monastery. Another vow that they take is the vow of obedience. Now, I found this to be the hardest vow for me because obedience basically means, in reality, that you're giving your personal will and decision-making power to the abbess or to the abbot, which is the head of the monastery. So for me, that was the biggest challenge, was allowing someone else to make decisions for me as to what type of work I would do in the monastery, when I could pray, when I could leave the monastery. You basically have to ask permission for everything. It's kind of like being a child again and having very little power over your day-to-day life. The final vow that they take is the vow of celibate chastity. Now, chastity just means a very directed focus of sexuality. It doesn't mean that someone is celibate. They might be married, for example, and in a chaste relationship, but the Trappists are celibate. So they are not in an intimate relationship with any particular person because the idea is that you channel that energy to the greater service of the world and towards your prayer and relationship with God and with Christ in particular. The Cistercians or Trappists have a lot of vows. These vows were challenging to work with, especially the last two, the vow of obedience and the vow of celibacy. But you do receive some training in these vows, and it's not expected that you'll be perfect immediately, but that you grow in these vows throughout your lifetime, and that you continue to challenge yourself every single day to grow in a person centered in God with these vows. So given the background of the Trappists and then the vows that they take, my experience when I lived in both the Shenandoah Valley region of Virginia and around the Mississippi River area in Iowa was very different, perhaps, than most people who visit those communities. Because they are cloistered, they typically don't allow outside visitors to enter in the monastery. There is a separate area in the church where visitors can come for Mass every Sunday, but there's the expectation that nobody will really talk to you or meet with you afterwards or before Mass. You really have to get special permission for that. They don't engage in spiritual direction of lay people, which is a little bit different than priests, for example, who might do that in a parish setting. They are not nurses, they are not educators. They basically spend their whole day praying. And they pray with a schedule called the Liturgy of Hours. Now, the Liturgy of Hours consists of 7 prayers throughout the day. And throughout the day, you're praying. You start early in the morning, around 3 or 4 a.m. Yes, it's that early. The bell rings. Everybody gets up from their rooms or their cells, walks to the chapel, and starts chanting and praying the Psalms in a very quiet and slow manner. After vigils, which last about 45 minutes, then you have about 3 hours of free time where I would practice yoga, I would meditate in my room. A lot of sisters are engaging in what's called Lectio Divina, or spiritual scripture reading the scripture again and again, letting it sink into your heart, and then journaling about it and allowing it to apply to your own life. After those 3 hours in the morning, we would have breakfast if we wanted to on our own. Then we would have morning prayer called lauds. After that was Mass. Then we would engage in work. So the Trappists actually do work. They earn their own living. Some of them make beer, some of them make candy. The community that I stayed at in Virginia made cheese, and they made only one cheese, Gouda cheese. Thank goodness, because I love Gouda cheese. So we would spend the morning making the Gouda cheese. Some of the other sisters would work on cleaning or preparing for dinner, which was their main lunch period of the day, their main meal of the day. So that's often what I ended up doing, was a couple hours of work. Then dispersed within that, you had terce, which is another prayer. You had sext, which is another called a little hour of prayer. You would have lunch period, which, as I mentioned, is called dinner. And that basically just involved buffet style, sitting at this long wooden table on a pretty uncomfortable wooden chair with the abbess or the head of the monastery at the front of the room. And everybody would just eat in silence. Now, the Trappists don't eat meat, but occasionally they will eat fish, often only for special occasions. So the meals are primarily vegetarian. Yes, we did have eggs and we did have cheese if we wanted to, but it wasn't required. During mealtime, there's somebody sitting at the corner of the room whose job it is simply just to read from a spiritual text. That could be any text. It doesn't have to be the Bible. This person would actually eat before or after everybody else ate. So the idea was during dinner time, you would sit in silence and you would integrate what you hear into your subconscious and into your conscious mind so that it would carry through with you to the rest of your day and into your work. The Trappists work to earn a living. That's important. They're self-sustaining. They don't rely on donations, although sometimes they do receive them. But they also work as a way to break up their day, the monotony of the day, to stay productive, and also to continue to remember that God is with us throughout all types of movement and action in life. We don't have to stay still in order to discover God. Work is a very important part of the Trappist way of life. Then after lunch, there's typically a little nap period. Now, I couldn't nap at all because I have trouble sleeping right after I eat, so I would often simply stay up and meditate or most likely read. They had a really, really large library that I love to go to throughout the day. Then after nap time, there would be more work. There would be another prayer session, very small, where you would read the Psalms together as a community. That's called known. And then there would be a free time. And the free time you only get is about an hour, and that depends on the community. You get an hour where most people would either take a nap or go walking in the property. The Trappists are renowned for having their monasteries in beautiful locations as a way to inspire their community members to get outside and to discover God. Nature is a theme in all Trappist communities. You won't find them in the city. So I would use this time during free time to go outside and roam the woods, or I would exercise. They did have an elliptical, believe it or not, in the basement. Many people use this time to read or to finish up some of their work, although that was not recommended to continue to work. And some people also played with the dogs. We had 2 dogs at the monastery. One actually died rather tragically, but you could use this time to take the dogs out for a walk. And you didn't need to even put leashes on the dogs because they were really well behaved and there was so much open space. After our free time, we would have very light supper, very small meal to wind down the day. Then we would have an evening prayer called Compline. And Compline is a prayer that's often sung, lasts about 20 minutes or so, where the head of the monastery, the abbess, would bless you with holy water and send you off to go to sleep. Our particular community decided we wanted a group meditation after Compline, so we would sit on a stool, like a meditation stool, each of us, and face the cross, face the Eucharist, close our eyes, and simply reflect on the goodness of God. Some of the sisters would also pray the rosary during that time, and that's what's known as meditation. It's a community meditation of about 20 minutes. Then the expectation was you would go back to your cell and go to bed at 8 o'clock at night. So your schedule was a little bit different, perhaps, than you were used to. For me, I found that I was very tired when I first stayed with them because I was not on that sleep cycle. I had trouble going to bed that early at 8 o'clock. I would often stay up until 10. And then I was so worried that I would miss the bell for vigils at 3:45 a.m. that I would often set my own alarm that I brought with me for 2:30 a.m. So I was only getting maybe like 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night the first week or two that I was there, and I was completely drained. I was so tired that it was not hard for me to stay quiet most of the time because I was trying not to fall asleep. So most of the time I was either staying awake or trying to stay awake in the chapel and in my work that I had to do. That was my day living with the Trappists. On Fridays, we would have something called Hermit Day, where the expectation was you would not work at all. The only communal prayer that would be offered would be Mass. Every other part of the hours, the little hours, would be done in your own cell. So this was a time for sisters to develop their own personal relationship with God, to not have to worry about doing anything else within the monastery. The Trappists are very much known for their community and their communal structure, and that's really what St. Benedict wanted when he established the Order of St. Benedict. He wanted monks and nuns living together in a strict schedule, focusing on silent conversion, both externally and internally. Now, for many people, that's a challenge. For me, I didn't find it to be a challenge. I love keeping to myself. Actually, the reason why I ended up leaving the Trappists was because I felt I wasn't getting enough alone time, enough quiet time. I felt like every time I was engrossed in Lectio Divina or meditating, the bell rang and I had to jump up, stop whatever I was doing, and rush to the chapel. So I felt constantly on the move, and I noticed a lot of the sisters were exhibiting symptoms of anxiety because of that. It was really hard to kind of settle into the routine. But the idea of the routine is to create a sense of stability and rhythm in your day so that you don't have to focus on worrying about where you'll be or what you'll have to do next. It takes away your worry, at least it's supposed to. For me, I found it frustrating. The last time I visited the Trappist, I remember going into the chapel, and the vocation director that was in charge of my discernment process, in charge of my formation of being a Trappist, looked at me in the eye and said, "Andrea, I think you found your home." And I told her, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I did, because I continue to have this desire to visit the Carthusians in France, which are a very strict and quiet hermit-like community where they live in hermitages alone, and they only get together once for vigils at night. But she disagreed with me. She felt like the Trappists and the Trappist monastery was the best place for me. I just found it not suffocating. I felt like I had a lot of freedom there in terms of space, but I thought my schedule was a little suffocating, and I didn't have a lot of time to really engross myself in the types of things that brought me closer to God. For me, meditating, being out in nature, writing, these are all ways that I commune with God, and I don't feel like I need to do them with other people. In fact, I find that oftentimes other people kind of distract me from my quiet, peaceful relationship with God. That's why I ended up leaving. And it was a big transition for me to leave the monastery. It was a big loss. I experienced a lot of grief for 6-7 months, maybe even longer, because it was such a culture shock to come back to everyday life of a layperson where you're independent, you're creating your own schedule, but you also have a lot more responsibility. I don't regret my time with them though. It was a big part of my formation as a person, and it really shaped the person that I am today. Because of them, I think I've developed more humility. I've learned how to let go of control and trust more and have faith more that things will work out the way they're supposed to work out. I have much more inner silence when I'm around people or in conversation. I'm not always jumping to think about what I'll say next to someone or trying to prove myself in the world. I'm simply able to accept the moment and accept myself, no matter where I am, with a quiet mind and a quiet heart. I've really learned how to listen when I was with them, and I'll always be grateful. That was my experience with the Trappists and a little bit about their history. If you're interested in learning more or you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment box below. I would love if you would subscribe to my channel, so please do that because I'll talk a little bit more about my monastic journey and my experiences. And I look forward to talking to you and seeing you soon. Bye.